Welcome, everybody. My name is Peter Larson. I'm the chair of the Ottawa Forum on Israel Palestine, which is organizing this event. I want to start off by thanking First Unitarian for hosting us here tonight. Also want to thank the Anishinaabe people on whose land we're gathering tonight, and in recognition of that, a board member of my organization, OFIP, has made a donation to the TEG 1 housing for Aboriginal youth here in Ottawa. We're coming together here at a dangerous time. Lots of world events, unsettling world events. Not only have we seen 16 months of unremitting genocide in Gaza, going basically unchallenged by the Western world, including Canada, but just last week, of course, we had this terrible and unprovoked attack on Iran by Israel. Tonight, we'll listen and learn and exchange ideas. We have three speakers tonight, but Senator Wu is stuck in the House. He's told us he's going to be a little bit late, so we're going to start. He's the third speaker of the three we have anyway, so that should work out fine. So we're going to examine tonight what role Canada can and should play concerning the genocide in Gaza and the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, where I have just come back, and I was talking to someone else here tonight who's just come back from the West Bank as well. The ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, I'm sure most people here understand, didn't start after October 7th, 2023. It didn't even start after June 1967. It began in 1947 with the UN approval of the confiscation of over half of Palestine to be turned over to European Jewish refugees. The Zionist militias then ethnically cleansed most of historic Palestine in what was known as the Nakba, expelling 750,000 people. Many of them ended up in Gaza, which is part of the reason why Gaza today is such a difficult place to be. Few in the West at that time paid any attention to the situation. Fortunately, today, people are paying more attention. And in fact, I'm sure that many people in this room have written letters, sent emails, demonstrated, signed petitions, and so on to try to get our government to start doing something about this, to get our government to actually enforce the international law that it says it stands for, but is more honored in the breach than in the observance. And also to get our fellow Canadians to recognize that a genocide really is happening on our watch, and that we have not only the right but the responsibility as individuals to do something about it. Now, the new government of Mark Carney has taken some small steps in the right direction. Early in May, you may remember, he signed a joint declaration with French Prime Minister Macron and the French President Macron and British Prime Minister Starmer, castigating Israel for its intolerable treatment of the Palestinians and threatening concrete action. That action has come in tiny steps. 2 weeks ago, it put sanctions on 2 Israeli ministers, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and last Thursday, there was a vote in the United Nations General Assembly, overwhelming vote, condemning Israel. Only a few countries, US and Israel and the Solomon Islands and a few South Pacific islands supported. Canada voted in favor of the motion of condemnation, despite strong objections and strong representations from the United States. So some people say this is all smoke and mirrors. It's not nearly enough that Carney and Anita Amand are just mouthing the words, so it doesn't mean anything. Well, maybe, but Canada was not saying or doing those things under Trudeau or under Harper or under Martin. So there is a slight change in the right direction. Too little and too late, of course. Too faltering, of course, but something. And those small steps by Carney have come about as a result of pressure. Pressure from your letters, your emails, the demonstrations, and public opinion polls. And the pressure that comes from an educated public that watches the TV and hears the news from Gaza every day. So now is not the time, in my view, to give up in frustration, although I am frustrated. Now is the time to apply more pressure and to learn how to become more effective in our pressure. In any event, the Palestinians in Jenin, in Jerusalem, and in Gaza can't give up. They have no alternative, and we can't either. Only this week, a new poll by Leger showed that nearly 50% of Canadians now think that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. But that also means that despite all of the evidence coming out of Gaza, another 50% aren't so clear. I went door to door in my neighborhood to invite people to come to this meeting. I knocked on 100 doors, and I had lots of conversations with people. Most of the people that I spoke to agree that Israel has gone too far, but they still think that Israel has a right to defend itself, and they fear that if given a chance, Hamas would wipe them all out. So they're confused about the origin of the conflict. Many think this is a centuries-old religious, ethnic conflict between two people who hate each other, and in that case, there's nothing that Canada can or should do about it. However, they do want the killing stopped, and that's something is good, and we should be pushing on our government to stop the genocide. We hope that tonight's meeting will help all of us become more effective in talking to our friends and persuading them that while Canada can't resolve the problem in the Middle East, we can do something to stop the genocide. Here's how the evening will unfold. We'll hear from 3 expert speakers who will bring us knowledge, understanding, and insight. Each speaker has agreed to limit their remarks to 12 minutes, and Peggy asked me to give her a signal halfway through so she'll know when to. First of all, we hear from Dr. Iyas Salim, who is adjunct professor at Carleton University. Dr. Salim grew up in Gaza, where he still has both friends and family. He will share firsthand information from Palestinians living in the nightmare that Israel is inflicting on them. Next, we'll hear from Peggy Mason, president of the Rideau Institute. Peggy is a former Canadian ambassador. She will examine Canadians' legal obligations under international and humanitarian law and examine what Canada is doing and not doing with respect to its legal obligations. And finally, it will be the turn of Senator Wu, who will be coming along, inshallah, very shortly. He's not a member of the government, although he is a senator. As an independent senator, he's not far from the debates that are going on. He has been using his position to push and prod the Canadian government and his fellow senators to stand up for human rights for Palestinians. So with those presentations, we'll have a better idea of what the current situation is, and then what Canada's obligations are, and in the face of overwhelming evidence why Canada is being so timid. That will be followed by a question and answer period of about 40 minutes. In order to be efficient and deal with the most challenging questions, we will ask you to fill out question cards. The question cards are beside you. And if you need another one, you can raise your hand and we will run around question cards and collect them here. I will deliver some concluding remarks at 9 o'clock, and the former part of the evening will end at 9:10. But the room is rented for another half an hour, so our speakers have agreed to stay around for another half an hour, and you can chat with each other or chat with the speakers, follow up when the formal part of the meeting is over. So let's get to it. Let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Iyas Salim. As I said, adjunct professor of public and global affairs at Carleton University. He was born in Gaza, so 90% or 80% of the people in Gaza are not from Gaza. They're refugees that were from Jaffa or Beersheba or somewhere else. His family, on the contrary, was from Gaza. So he was not made a refugee in 1948. He became a refugee later because he can't return to Gaza now. He studied in Japan. He returned to Gaza to work for the Japan International Cooperation Agency, kind of like CEDA. And there he worked with aid projects and programs in Gaza, fostering collaboration with NGOs and international organizations. We've asked Dr. Salim to give us an on-the-ground perspective with what's happening in Gaza today, particularly because he has so many friends and relatives who are in Gaza right now. Yes, welcome. You can come up here or you can speak from there, whatever you prefer. The senator's here. Welcome, Senator. Okay. You want to come here or speak there? Pardon? You can speak from here or you can speak from there. What do you prefer?
I speak
here. Sure.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you, and thank you, Peter and team, for your efforts and organizing this event. My name is Iyas Salim. In mid-May last month, I received a message from my friend in Khan Yunis, south of Gaza, telling me that his sister, the night before, placed a pot of water on fire to create the illusion that food was being cooked as her starving children would fall, so her starving children would fall asleep. Another friend told me how his brother's children cried and cried from hunger and couldn't sleep until finally they were too exhausted to cry any longer and simply fell asleep. He also said, as I was walking past a tent on the street this evening, I heard the wife say to her husband, the children are crying, they want food. The husband replied, put them to sleep, they will forget. When I phoned my friend Dawood in Gaza City, who works in public health and used to teach medical science at a university, he said every day is worse than the day before. The level of this criminality is beyond comprehension. The one who dies is better off than the one injured. Starvation is another disaster. Hunger is killing people. People line up and wait at humanitarian kitchen from 10 in the morning for lentil or bean soup. It is only one soup a day. And if you don't get it, you wait hungry until the next day to get the only meal of the day. He continued, malnutrition has already shown on us. We have lost half of our weight. Missiles and bombs continue to fall on us. Who knows who will wake up in the morning alive or wake up cut into pieces? Who will die of hunger? He then said the world is merciless and oppressive. The UN and the world only condemn, just condemn. It is shameful. This is killing without mercy. Media covers Gaza, but nothing is happening. Then he ended the call saying, those who die are at rest from this horrible reality. The hospital director of my hometown, Khan Yunis, in southern Gaza Strip at Al Nasser Hospital said that the anemia rate has reached 100%. An entire generation of Palestinians in Gaza is being condemned to malnutrition and disease. In a message from my friend Saeed, who is displaced in Al-Mawasi area west of Khan Yunis city, he wrote, the bombing continues massively and relentlessly. We cannot tell where the sounds of bombing are coming from. Is it from the north, from the south, or east? No one knows. I heard the sound of many explosions. Families are burning to death in Al-Mawasi. The drones have been firing. The F-16s are bombing relentlessly. The name Al-Mawasi has a special place in my heart, and indeed the heart of local Palestinians in Gaza. With its beautiful beaches and fertile agricultural area of Al-Mawasi, between the town and the blue Mediterranean coastline, the area was once like a paradise to us. The land was blessed with farms of guava, mango, vegetables, orange groves, figs, grapes, and palm trees. I was a school kid in the 1970s, growing up in Khan Yunis. I lived under military occupation. By the mid-1970s, Israeli settlers began to settle in the area of Al-Mawasi, west of Khan Yunis. They knew exactly what they were after, the most fertile land and the best quality aquifer water. So much for turning the desert into the blossoming garden, as the Zionist propaganda says. Palestine is the most fertile, rich land in the East Mediterranean. Al-Mawasi became the main collection of settlements within the Gaza Strip known as Gosh Katif settlement block. During that time, Israel would pump high-quality water of Al-Mawasi to Israel and then resell it to the Palestinians in Gaza through the Israeli company Makarot. To the local Palestinian farmers and residents of the land for generations, the arrival of those ghuraba, the strangers, was outrageous and unacceptable. Those settlers and the Israeli army terrorized our peaceful community, people known for their hospitality and kindness. Our daily life was violently attacked by Israeli occupation army. Since 1967, when Israel occupied the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, we were attacked in classrooms, homes, raided at night, curfews enforced, children arrested. The Israeli army terrorized our neighborhood and community. When I was a school kid, I remember my father would stay up all night in the living room. I asked him, Father, why are you awake in the middle of the night? He replied, I am waiting in case Israeli soldiers come. If they come to attack you or your brothers, I don't want them to wake you by beating you with the backs of their guns. I want to wake my children myself, he said. The image never left me, my father sitting all night, fearing foreign soldiers storming our home and bedrooms. After Israel occupied the Gaza Strip and the West Bank in 1967, no one over 16 could leave home without an ID. Israeli issued ID. Israeli soldiers patrolled the streets with guns, demanding to see IDs. If you didn't have one, you were beaten and taken to the military occupation base in the city for torture and imprisonment. After finishing high school, I wanted to continue study abroad like many of my friends. The Israeli authorities issued a travel document called laissez-passer with the nationality listed as undefined and valid only for 1 year. That was how I first traveled, as undefined. During summer holidays, returning back from studying abroad, many Palestinian students would end up spending summer holidays in Israeli prison instead of being with their loved ones and families. The people of Gaza and the West Bank have been illegally occupied since 1967. International law defines Gaza Strip till this moment as occupied Palestinian territories. As the United Nations states, from June 1967 to this very moment, the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza have endured the horrible injustice for many, many decades. The majority of the people of Gaza, about 80%, are refugees who were dispossessed and ethnically cleansed from their homes in 1948. The Palestinian proverb, education as a ticket to the future, reflects how deeply we value education as a way of life. Families knowing that Israel closed all other doors through military occupation, its strangulation, siege on Gaza, denying opportunities, economy, trade, focus on education as a path to dignity, hope, and survival. Palestinian families raised their children to achieve the highest level of education possible. Before this war, the literacy rate of Gaza and the West Bank stood at 99.8%. Gaza boasted 12 universities and colleges. Female enrollment even exceeded that of males, as many boys had to work difficult jobs like construction to support their families. Now, in this genocide, we see Israeli soldiers proudly boasting about blowing up universities and setting libraries on fire, like the sickening photo of an Israeli soldier lighting a cigarette in front of burning bookshelves. What kind of people blow up universities? What kind of people are proud to set libraries on fire? Boasting about it on social media, how primitive and barbaric this is. My friend Musa, whose family owns land in Al-Mawasi, described a year ago in the situation that in the once beautiful Al-Mawasi, which has now become much worse. He said, everything around us has become like a cocktail. Al-Mawasi and Gaza, for that matter, have become a cocktail of roads, farms, houses, tents, asphalt, rubble, trees, all mixed up like cocktail. Everyone is sick, water is polluted, people are weak and thin. With a lack of clean drinking water, most people are dehydrated. We have an epidemic of hepatitis. It is a highly infectious disease, and many people are suffering from it. We sleep with insects. Next to us are cactus trees with all kinds of rodents and insects in them. He told me that everything here is polluted. His mother described the situation as nothing is disgusting anymore. He said 50 people would line up for a single toilet. For 21 months, the people of Gaza have been under this horrific genocide, bombardment and killing. There are endless, heartbreaking stories of families wiped out completely. This is a story a friend of mine shared with me on May 17 last month. The wife said to her husband, Hussein, what are you going to do? The sound of tanks is really close and the sky is filled with war jets. Hussein said, don't worry, just get the kids ready and gather them and gather anything we can. I will go find a car to get us out of here. The wife said, don't be long, Hussein. Can't you see how scared the kids are? Take Abed, the eldest son, with you. Hussein said, no, let him stay with you. Let him help look after his sibling. I won't be long. 15 minutes later, I will be back. Hussein moved quickly. He jumped over the rubble surrounding the house and ran towards the nearest spot where cars might pass. He stood in the middle of a street shouting, trying to find any way to get them out. He pleaded with other people, fleeing death, sometimes begging, other times offering all the money he has, until he met his rescuer. He got in the seat next to the driver and began giving direction. Turn right at this street. After 500 meters, there is a house still standing. We will turn from there. A huge explosion cut off the conversation and their breath. The driver said, I can't go any further. Hussein jumps out of a car and pleads, okay, just don't move from here. I will bring my wife and kids. I won't be long. Just wait 2 minutes. The place is closed, right behind the house up front. He runs through the smoke and dust filling the area, trying to see clearly. He stumbles and falls, then gets up and runs again. Spotted people near his home. He gets closer and closer, only to find the house completely destroyed. He starts screaming, my children, please, I want my children. I swear I wasn't late. I want to get them a car so we would leave. Please, just one of my kids. I just want one of them to come out of this under the rubble. Please, people, help me. Just one. Look, the driver is calling me. He's waiting so I can take them. I beg you, help me. Just get me one of my children. 500 meters away, the driver was still waiting, saying to himself, the man is late. Not knowing that Hussein hadn't been late, but an Israeli warjet in the sky had a different opinion and decided to take them to death and finish the whole family. How many times in Gaza does a family have to evacuate or to be displaced? My friend Salama, who told me last week, it was his 15th time he and his family had to evacuate. 15 times. Every time a family evacuates, it is costly and expensive. You need to find a spot to set up a tent. He told me that last week he was looking for a piece of land about 300 meters square. The monthly rent of an empty piece of land is about $3,000. He said the population of Khan Yunis and Rafah are now squeezed and pushed to evacuate into an area of 7 kilometers by 3 kilometers. There is no space whatsoever. He told the story of a woman asking people in the area to find her a tent. He has no money, she has no money, and has no choice but to remain in her damaged home in the city of Khan Yunis, which is under constant bombardment by Israeli jet fighters. Tank, artillery, and drone missiles are bombing. If she cannot afford to evacuate, she is going to be bombed, he said. In a phone call with my friend Musa, who is displaced in Al-Mawasi, he said the following: before I die, I want answer to 2 questions. How does Israel think? And why does America support Israel? My friends in Gaza ask, is the world watching what is happening to us? Does the world accept starving children? Is the world aware of this genocide? This is not a war. This is killing for the sake of killing. State terror like we have never seen before. A live stream genocide visible on everyone's phones and screens. Gaza has exposed the hypocrisy of the West, especially of the fully complicit United States. Western governments have enabled, protected, and justified Israel actions while claiming... Okay, just a couple of minutes. Okay. Israel action claiming the stand for human rights and international law, from complicity in occupation to complicity in genocide. The West has long been partner and enabler of Israel's illegal occupation, human rights violations, and now genocide. As we speak, leaders of the G7 are meeting here in Canada. Beyond the smiles with the backdrop, the Rocky Mountains, let us not fool ourselves. They are smiling while a genocide against the people of Gaza is happening. Meanwhile, a regional war is raging, which could escalate into a World War involving nuclear weapons and annihilation. The choice is yours. What kind of world do you want your children and grandchildren to live? If you live in a representative democracy, test it. Let your voice be heard. Speak loudly and clearly for the kind of world you want. we are being tested to the core of our morality and humanity. Speak to your friends, family members, and representatives. The ballot box is not the end. It is just the beginning. Never allow public figures to hide behind privilege, comfort zones, and hypocrisy. You voted them in power. You must also hold them accountable. At the end of the day, this is about humanity at risk. It is within our power to use your freedom to free others. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Iyas. Your passion comes through very clearly. It's a terrible situation. It's very hard for Canadians to really appreciate. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Our next speaker is Peggy Mason. Peggy is the president of the Rideau Institute. She's a former diplomat with specific expertise in the area of international law. She served at the UN as Canada's ambassador for disarmament from 1989 to 95 and was later a senior fellow at the Norman Pattison School of International Affairs at Carleton. We've asked Peggy to help us understand what Canada's legal obligations are with respect to the current genocide in Gaza and evaluate how well or poorly we are carrying them out. Peggy's going to speak we'll pass the microphone over to Peggy, who's over there.
Thank you very much. My eyes are going through kind of a transition, and depending on how far away the paper is, I can or cannot see it. So, hence here, but I hope everybody can see and hear me. Of course, anybody who knows me, asking me to speak briefly on this topic, but I'm going to do my best, and Peter's going to warn me halfway, and then he's going to warn me 2/3, so hopefully I can get the most important things that I haven't said yet, in the last little bit. Just before I start, on a much happier note than the subject we have before us this evening, July of 1982, I was married in this church. Yeah, it's a beautiful place to be married. Anyway, I want to start, one of the things that hit me when I started preparing for this was just the number of legal obligations that are engaged and that Canada should be fully respecting. And although progress has been made, as Peter said, we still aren't anywhere near we should be, bearing in mind that Canada was instrumental in negotiating and achieving the coming into force of the Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court. And for that effort, we held the first presidency of that court. So that's how far we've fallen. And little steps to getting back to where we need to be. So I thought I'd just very, very briefly indicate the relevant court rulings and advisory opinions, and then what the legal obligations are on Canada that flow from that, and then look at how is Canada, how well is Canada doing and what are we not doing, as Peter said, because there are some pretty specific things that we're not doing that we can do immediately. So in December, the end of December 2023, South Africa, with many countries joining in on its side, but not that many Western countries, but two of the Western countries that need to be mentioned are Norway and Ireland, who joined with South Africa in the case in the International Court of Justice, alleging genocide. The case was alleging that Israel was committing genocide. And because the case itself, of course, will take a long time to come, years to come to court, as is typical in these kinds of urgent situations, they sought immediate, urgent, provisional orders pending the full hearing. So that's the start of the genocide case in the International Court of Justice, the highest level of court in the world, and it focuses on state responsibility. The next area of importance is the work of the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court looks at individual responsibility, individual criminal responsibility for international crimes. And in May of 2024, the prosecutor, the International Criminal Court prosecutor, who had been at the receiving end of a lot of criticism, including from the Rito Institute for not acting more quickly, did seek the issuance of warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu, the then Defense Minister Gallant, and also against Hamas leaders. I won't be saying much more with respect to the Hamas leaders because Israel assassinated all the Hamas leaders that were charged, and so those warrants have not been acted on, obviously. So the next thing that happens is and there's been some discussion of this already, and it's very, very important because on the 19th of July, 2024, the International Court of Justice heard another case in the form of an advisory opinion. One of the things that the International Court of Justice can do is it can render authoritative views of international law on specific issues based on requests, for example, from the General Assembly, UN General Assembly, and that was who brought this case. And the ICJ had made a ruling or gave its advisory opinion in July of 2024, determining that Israel's occupation of the occupied Palestinian territory since 1967 was illegal. And this, of course, was also with respect to Gaza. Even though Israel had purported to withdraw from Gaza in 2005, the court found that it was still under effective Israeli control, and therefore the occupation was illegal there as well. So that ruling was in July of 2024, as I said. Then, on the 21st of November 2024, the International Criminal Court granted the warrants, stating there were reasonable grounds to believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu and then Defense Minister Gallant had committed the war crime of using starvation as a method of warfare and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. The prosecutor was trying to get a finding of extermination. The court said at that stage there wasn't enough evidence of that, but there was the evidence of the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. Oh, God. The chamber also found reasonable grounds to believe that they are each responsible for the war crime of intentionally directing attacks against civilians. The court's investigations continue, and there is every possibility that further arrest warrants may be brought. Then, the one that's received rightly the most attention in January of 2024, the International Court of Justice found, and this is in the genocide case that South Africa brought, that the right of the Palestinian people in Gaza under the Genocide Convention not to be subjected to acts of genocide is plausibly at stake, and that there exists a real and imminent risk of genocide in Gaza. And it made 6 provisional orders. Israel was to prevent genocidal acts, prevent incitement to genocide, take immediate measures, effective measures to enable the provision of humanitarian assistance and the preservation of evidence. And they've given further emergency orders with respect to Israel's duty to stop famine and starvation since then. Okay, so Israel has disregarded all of these orders. And since the breaking, they've denounced the court, denigrated the court, says the court's anti-Semitic and not legitimate. Well, both courts, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. And since the breaking of the ceasefire in March 2025, and the Canadian media will talk about it in the passive tense, since the collapse of the ceasefire in March of 2025, well, if you read authoritative experts like the International Crisis Group, they will clearly say, since Israel broke the ceasefire in March of 2025, Israel has exponentially increased the ferocity of its attacks on civilians and infrastructure and deepened its denial of aid to the point where the International Crisis Group, to which I referred, has detailed what it calls Israel's starvation experiment to force all Palestinians into the tiny area in the south, into a tiny area in the south where they have to come to try and get a tiny bit of aid, while completely destroying the rest of Gaza, and then giving them the choice of starvation or voluntary departure. The question, of course, being to where, because no Arab state to date is going to agree to this plan. So, what are the legal obligations for Canada? And since of course I have so little time, I never judge the time, right? I'm going to I'll do both, what our legal obligations are, and what we're not doing. So, the first and foremost, under the Rome Statute, which is, as I said, for international criminal responsibility, it's not only the commission of the crime that is, or the attempted commission of the crime, as with domestic crime, that is prohibited, but also its facilitation by aiding and abetting, including providing the means for its commission, which means all Canadian officials, and remember this is individual legal responsibility, all Canadian officials are therefore under the obligation not to facilitate war crimes by providing the means for its commission, which of course in turn imposes a clear obligation on Canada, that is on all Canadian government officials and Canadian companies, not to transfer arms to Israel. Now, it has been a long and torturous process, but finally Canada, and this really was public pressure, it was the minority government with the NDP really, really pushing on this, step by step. First, they banned any future exports. Then they banned exports under existing permits, but left a number of loopholes. Slowly but surely, the loopholes have been closed except for the one remaining loophole, which is parts and components of major weapon systems which are shipped to Israel via the United States. The most dramatic example of that are aircraft parts for the fighter jets that are bombing Gaza. So it may be a minor, it may seem minor, but it's not. It's not. But we've moved on that. Now, the second really important area where Canada can really do a lot is because the occupation by Israel of the occupied Palestinian territory, including Gaza, has been ruled illegal. All states are under an obligation not to recognize as legal the situation arising from the unlawful presence of the State of Israel in the occupied territory and not to render aid or assistance in maintaining that situation. And in plain English, what that means, means that Canada is under an obligation to cancel its free trade agreement with Israel, because that agreement does not recognize, does not separate the occupied Palestinian territory from Israel. That on its face is a gross violation. But any dealings under that, because we are not under this ruling, countries are not allowed to deal with Israel insofar as it is purporting to act on or make regulations or do things with respect to the occupied territory, because that's now all rendered illegal. That, if we did that, and the International Crisis Group and many others are really hammering, focusing on Europe, because of course not just Canada, but Europe in particular, to take these steps on the economic front. Israel has never faced any consequences for its actions. It will not face consequences from the United States. But if enough other countries really start taking the economic restrictions, then ordinary Israelis will start to see an impact. And unfortunately, I mean, there are a number of others, but those are the sort of key, what I was going to say was ordinary Israelis, unfortunately, polls indicate that a majority of Israelis support the collective punishment of Palestinians. They're all the same. They're all part of Hamas. And so they really have got to start seeing consequences. Now, I haven't had, but I'll leave it to questions. I'm sure it'll come up in questions. I haven't touched on, and this will be my final point, that obviously under the Genocide Convention, where there is a plausible risk of genocide, never mind if the court has made a final ruling. No, they haven't. They have ruled that there is a clear and imminent risk of genocide. That triggers the obligation on all states parties, including Canada, to act to prevent the risk from becoming a reality. Most experts believe that there is a genocide ongoing, but Canada has the highest level of duty to act under the risk of it happening, which no one can sanely argue the risk isn't there. Okay, I'll stop there. Oh, God.
Well done.
Oh, look, I have
Thank you, Peggy. I knew I was asking a lot when I said I want to do it within 12 minutes. You did a pretty good job. Thank you. So now, last but not least, is the Honourable Senator Yuen-Pau. Yuen-Pau, you might want to speak from here or from there. He sits, as I mentioned before he came in, he sits as an independent senator, so he's not a representative of the government of Canada. We colloquially talk about the government as being the Senate and the Parliament and so on, but he's not a representative of the government of Canada. He's a member of several Senate committees, including Foreign Affairs and International Trade, which is particularly relevant to us. He's taken, as a senator, a particular interest in the issue of human rights for Palestinians, and I've seen him asking questions of the government, of government representatives, and other senators around the issue of human rights for Palestinians. We've asked Senator Wu to come help us understand the contradictory pressures that face Mr. Carney's government and help us identify where he thinks there might be ways to move forward. So help me welcome Senator Yuen-Pau.
Thank you, Peter. Good evening to everyone. I've just come from the Senate sitting there, still sitting, ostensibly to deal with some very urgent matters, urgent bills that have to be passed. But in the scheme of things, it's hard to think of a more urgent issue and crisis today than the plight of Palestinians and the unfolding genocide that has taken place across Gaza and the West Bank. As I hear Peter's draconian control over the speaking time, I've been slashing my speech, but so it will be truncated, but it's a written text, and it will be available on my website, and you feel free to look at the full text and to share it widely. While this is an urgent matter, there is, of course, zero possibility of the Canadian government prioritizing legislation related to Palestine over the bills currently before us, especially when a summer recess is only a few weeks away. But it is not as if the crisis in Palestine emerged last week. Following the horrific Hamas attack on Israeli civilians on 17th October 2023, the Israeli response has taken on more and more the character of a brutal and totalizing war in Gaza and on Palestinians. The warnings of such have been in place at least as early as the January 2024 ICJ advisory that the genocide claims against Israel were plausible. That was 17 months ago. Since then, the evidence that a genocide is in fact taking place has mounted to the point where the overwhelming weight of international expert and legal opinion agrees. Even if the government of Canada was unpersuaded about genocide in January 2024, the proper course of action would have been to act on the warning that a genocide could unfold and that there was a responsibility to prevent that from happening, as Peggy has told us. Instead, we defended Israel's military actions in Gaza, accepted its claims about humanitarian aid going to the territory, and in so doing, watched from the sidelines a genocide that unfolded before our very eyes. In the memorable but chilling words of Amnesty International, this was a live-streamed genocide to which no government can claim to not have known about. I think the question that Canadians must face up to eventually is whether our government not only watched the live stream as passive viewers, but in fact aided and abetted the genocide through our actions, such as statements of support for Israel, arms sales, suppression of Palestinian voices in Canada, votes in the UN, and so on. The issue of complicity, therefore, looms large over Canada, and if nothing else, should motivate the government to make a major course correction in its position on the Gaza conflict. Canada-Israel relations and the Palestine question more broadly. It is sad that it would take the fear of complicity in crimes against humanity to motivate a change in Canadian policy rather than compassion for Palestinians and a commitment to international law. But such is the state of Canadian politics today and our fealty to the status quo in international relations. It gets worse. I worry that realist politicians and their cynical advisors will not only resist a change in policy, but also double down on rejecting the accusation of genocide against Israel in the belief that a denouement for Palestine is not far off and that a victorious Israel, supported by the United States and opportunistic Arab neighbors, will diffuse the attention on war crimes by focusing on a so-called positive agenda of relocation of Palestinians and the reconstruction of a devastated Gaza. All of you know the cruel aphorism about how history is written by the victors. In many ways, that saying sums up the conventional history of Israel-Palestine relations going back to the arrival of Zionists to Palestine at the start of the 20th century. This is a history that privileges Zionist views of what amounts to a history of settler colonialism in Palestine that was made possible by the patronage of the United Kingdom first and then the United States, and which persists to this day. Most of our political class, most of our leaders in establishment only know the Zionist version of that history, which partly explains why they reflexively use buzz phrases like Israel's right to defend itself, the goal of a two-state solution, the ever-present risk of anti-Semitism, and the need to, quote, combat Palestinian terrorism. But that is not the only reason for the strongly pro-Zionist positions of our political class, which goes back to at least the 1947 vote on the UN Resolution 181 and the partition of Palestine. In a forthcoming article for International Journal, Dr. John Price describes how the pioneering diplomat Elizabeth McCallum was part of a Canadian UN delegation and led the fight to stop Lester Pearson from pushing through Resolution 181. Not all politicians are enthralled to Zionist narratives and unable to see the horror of a live-stream genocide in Gaza. Some have spoken out fiercely, and I'm thinking of Salma Zahid, Heather McPherson, Mario Bulow, Elizabeth May, and others. Whether we're talking about the House of Commons or the Senate, though, the number of parliamentarians who have been public about their concern over Palestine is very small compared to overall numbers. To the extent that the views of parliamentarians reflect the Canadian population, one might expect that about 50% genocide is happening in Gaza. That would accord with the 49% of Canadians who hold that view. Parliamentarians are never short of, why then the very limited voice coming from Parliament Hill? Parliamentarians are usually never short of breath in warning about genocide in other places. Think about Ukraine and Xinjiang, and certainly not when it comes to remembering the atrocity that gave us the very concept of genocide, which is, of course, the Holocaust. But here's the rub. It is precisely that we so revere the remembrance of the Holocaust that inhibits us from invoking the memory of that genocide against a state that was established in the wake of its horror. The historian Enzo Traveso details brilliantly in his book, Gaza Faces History, how memorializing the Holocaust as a sort of civil religion that honored human rights and the values of Western liberal democracies after the Second World War. In an interview, he said, quote, "The memory of the Holocaust experienced a paradoxical metamorphosis, and it was weaponized by Israel and by most Western powers in order to become a policy of an unconditional support of Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories," which is where we are today in Canada. Outside of the United States and Germany, the way in which this distortion of reality has captured the political class and establishment leaders is perhaps stronger and more pernicious than in most other Western democracies. It partly explains why there is so little protest coming from MPs and senators, and why Gaza is not more of an election issue, why there's so little coverage in Canadian media, and all of the other problems that we see with respect to public opinion on Gaza. In fact, the government has endorsed the very problem that Dr. Traveso describes. The so-called Canadian Handbook on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism specifically defines what it calls Holocaust inversion as an example of anti-Semitism. This working definition of Holocaust inversion is illogical and disingenuous. I agree that Holocaust denial and minimization are abominable, and that portrayals of Jews as Nazis are hurtful and unacceptable. But the question of mass atrocities, war crimes, and genocide is distinct from how Jews are portrayed. These questions can only be answered empirically and through the lens of international law. And they apply not to Jewish people as such, but to the state of Israel, which is of course subject to international law. The fact that Israel defines itself as a Jewish state is an awkward fact that connects any mass atrocities by the state to its Jewish identity. That is a problem of Israel's own creation and not a slander on the part of those who accuse Israel of genocide, much less an example of anti-Semitism. Even if you don't think the threshold of genocide has been met, the simple question is this: is the state of Israel exempt from the possibility of genocidal acts? Does it forever have a get-out-of-jail card? I understand the difficulty that many of us have in coming to terms with the idea that a Semitic people who suffered unspeakable horror at the hands of Nazis could now be inflicting another kind of unspeakable horror against Palestinians who, by the way, are also Semitic peoples. The historian Timothy Garton Ash had this reflection to offer, quote, "Ever since I started studying the history of Nazi Germany some 50 years ago, the Holocaust has been central to the way I think about Europe and what we are trying to do on our own continent, but also about how Europeans should speak and act in the world. If I'm honest, I hate to think, and even in my heart of hearts find it difficult to accept, that a Jewish state can behave in this way." I have an example here of the use of this illogical and disingenuous definition of Holocaust inversion, but I'll skip that, it's in my speech. The problem of inversion, however, is the opposite of what the IHRA definition identifies. Here again is Enzo Traveso, quote, "Those who are protesting against this genocidal war are accused of anti-Semitism. But if the memory of the Holocaust is mobilized to defend unconditionally a genocidal policy, maybe people could think that the memory of the Holocaust is intrinsically bad. If criticizing a genocide is anti-Semitism, many people would think that anti-Semitism is not so bad. And finally, many people would start thinking that the Holocaust itself is a myth invented by Israel in order to justify its policies of occupation of the Palestinian territories." Let me be clear. We cannot and should not come up with excuses for anti-Semitism and must always be vigilant against its manifestation in society. But false claims of anti-Semitism can be as damaging as anti-Semitism itself because of the corrosive effects on public sentiment that Dr. Traveso describes. And we are in a world today where anti-Semitism is used as a bludgeon against critics of Israel and a conversation stopper for serious debate on issues related to arms exports, sanctions, support for humanitarian assistance to Gaza, anti-Palestinian racism, and the recognition of Palestinian statehood. South of the border, anti-Semitism has been cited as the reason for, among other things, defunding government programs, deporting immigrants, curbing the number of foreign students into the United States, and punishing faculty and students because of their views. Which gets to what most Canadians today think of the existential crisis facing the country: how to not end up as the 51st state of the United States. I do not doubt the determination of Prime Minister Carney to resist American designs on our country. The biggest test of our independence, however, will be on foreign policy, including on the issue of Palestine, where the United States has already marked its disapproval over Canada's very modest tilt towards a more critical stance of Israel. It may well be that our appetite for a more robust stand against Israel is tempered by concern for the impact that it would have on relations with the United States. A prime example is our arms exports to Israel via the United States that are protected by a bilateral agreement with the Americans. We are likely to face other sources of US pressure that seek to link bilateral issues with Washington to our position on issues in Palestine and the Middle East more broadly. Given the economic stakes and the power of the Israel lobby, the temptation to succumb to these pressures will be very great, but they must be weighed against our long-standing rhetorical commitment to the rule of law and our reputation as a fair-minded and principled player. Can I get 1 minute? After all, Mr. Carney has said that if the United States doesn't want to be a leader in the world, Canada is willing to, quote, step up. As stirring as the Prime Minister's comments may be, Canada's ability to step up on global issues will be tested by how we manage the Palestine issue in the months and years ahead. As it is, Canada is seen by most of the world as being enthralled to US and Israeli interests and a laggard on support for Palestinians, as well as on issues such as the recognition of the state of Palestine. It is compounded by a glaring double standard in the way which Ottawa has responded to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine compared to our response to the war in Gaza. By every measure of war misery in the two conflicts, Canada's response has been lopsided and impossible to defend. This kind of hypocrisy perhaps did not matter as much when Canada and other G7 members were so much more dominant relative to other countries, and we could get away with the fine diplomatic art of defending foreign policy double standards. In a more multipolar world, however, countries of the so-called global south will be less willing to accept the doublespeak of Western diplomacy and the selective application of international law, especially when the Russia-Ukraine war is juxtaposed so starkly with Israel-Palestine. You can be sure that they will be skeptical about the ideas and initiatives of any country that seeks to step up to fill a void occupied by the United States in a way that simply mimics the United States. Even if we do not suffer international legal consequences from our failure to act against an unfolding genocide in Palestine, our international stature will be diminished, and any moral authority that we had on human rights issues in other parts of the world will be undermined. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuen-Pau. A lot of us have been following in the last couple of weeks this incident of the Feed Me graffiti on the Holocaust Memorial. And I heard again this morning there was some kind of ceremony yesterday, I guess, and I heard this morning talking about it. And so I decided to go by the Holocaust Memorial to take a look. And I looked at all the texts that were there. And of course, they talked very appropriately about the horrible things that happened in the Holocaust. But one thing struck me was quite absent, and that was never again. It was all about what happened. And at first, the slogan was never again. But that's not the slogan that's being used now. And to even talk about the fact that there is a genocide or a potential genocide is being portrayed as anti-Semitic, and I think that's dishonorable. We're now going to move to questions and answers. In order to have focused questions, we're going to ask you to write out your questions on the question cards. There are question cards on the benches there with you. If you don't see one and you want one, wave your hand. Ida Henderson is around. She has some question cards she can hand out. So please write out your questions and wave it about so it can be collected by one of our volunteers. One question per card, please. Please direct your question to Senator Wu, Ms. Mason, or Professor Salim. And I urge you to ask questions that particularly refer to the areas of expertise of the speakers. Now, while you're thinking about your questions, we're also going to be circulating a donation basket. We're in a church, that seems appropriate. As you know, this event was free, and there's absolutely no obligation to make any donation whatsoever. On the other hand, OFIP did have material costs, renting the room, insurance, AV, advertising, and so on and so forth. So I invite you to be generous, and we appreciate any support you can give us as the baskets go around. Stephen Chappell is in charge of the basketing, so we'll go back and forth. So now, while we do that, I had another announcement. So while that's happening, I'm going to ask one question of each of the speakers, and then we'll gather your questions up. My first question, and these questions come from my door-to-door knocking, from talking to people. And my first one is for Iyas. The question is about Hamas. People want, why don't the Palestinians overthrow Hamas? Does Hamas steal all the food that are coming in? What do your friends in Gaza say about that?
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thank you for the question. I think Peter sent me the question about 5 days ago, and immediately I asked the questions to my friends in Gaza. I am in touch with friends and relatives in Khan Yunis and in Gaza, and I'm almost like every day, phoning them, texting them, being in touch with them. And when I asked the question to my friends, I got the following answer. They said that the newly established food distribution centers by the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Fund, GHT, set up by, I guess it's Israel, the US, and some mercenaries in a number of spots, especially 3 of them along the Rafah corridor, and that is dividing the Gaza Strip from east to west, and also by the Netzarim. That's another line dividing the south of Gaza City and the middle of the Gaza Strip. They said that there is no way a policeman or an official, public official from the Gaza Strip could even dare to appear in public or in the streets, because they would be subject to being shot and killed by Israeli drones and by Israeli even jet fighters. No policeman could put on a uniform to go out in the streets and the distribution center and try to establish order in the area. That is something that would be impossible for any official, any policeman to appear in public. They are subject to being killed immediately. The other thing is, if UNRWA or the World Food Bank is responsible for distributing food, distribution food would be safe, and everybody would be able to get the humanitarian portion or food that they are entitled to. But the GHT distribution centers, as we know, as you already know in the news, every day, and even today, we have about 45 people got killed. Every day, from 30 to 60 people get killed at those distribution centers. So those distribution centers have become a place where to bring hungry people, hungry young men, to go out and try to get whatever food possible in front of the Israeli tanks, and then being shot and killed by Israeli tanks in front of humanitarian, in front of the GHT newly established humanitarian spots. The other thing is, Israel right now bombs as well the humanitarian kitchens that are, people get only, as I mentioned in the speech, 1 soup a day. And that is something that people are even afraid of going out to the humanitarian kitchen to get whatever food is. So the idea is, the problem is the absence of UNRWA, the absence of UN agencies is creating chaos, as well as the absence of public figures from the local policemen and the public officials not being able to carry out their duties and bring order to the streets. Otherwise, they would, because the main aim of Israel is to create as much chaos as possible, and especially now with setting up gangs in the Gaza Strip, arming them by Israel. Even Israeli officials have admitted to this by giving arms and weapons to gangs to kill people and create more chaos in the Gaza Strip.
Thanks, yes. I've caused a huge problem here. We have more questions than I could possibly ask to answer. We do have to leave absolutely the building at 10, so I'm not sure what. I will compile all these questions and send them to people because they're all great questions. I don't even know how to start here fairly. Peggy, there's a question here about genocide, about the financial sector, the financial complicity in genocide by the Canadian charitable sector, and about whether or not it's important they use the word genocide. Is that critical or not?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said about the financial.
Well, the question is, well, are Canadian NGOs complicit in the genocide by the Canadian charitable sector? But I want to, I'm not sure what, maybe they're thinking about JNF. I don't know what is being referred to.
No, there is definitely, I mean, there are definite recommendations that have been made with respect to the charitable sector. But first, let's just talk briefly about whether it makes any difference whether we say it's a genocide. In international legal terms, does it make any difference if we call it a genocide or say that there is a plausible risk of genocide? I mean, I would argue that the difference is not, I mean, obviously, to say it's a genocide, politically, it then becomes almost impossible. Well, who knows, but really untenable not to act. But the important point is the government cannot hide behind the fact that the court has not yet ruled on this, because there is an equal obligation, an equally urgent obligation to act to prevent the genocide. So in political terms, yes, I guess it does. But I don't want to obscure the fact that right now they have an urgent obligation under the Genocide Convention to act. Now, with respect, I'm really glad that actually the point was raised about charities, because that was one of the things that was addressed in the letter that was sent, and also we addressed it. Well, the Rideau Institute addressed it recently as well, but Rideau Institute, I was a signatory to this latest civil society letter led by the former head of Amnesty International, Alex Neve. And one of the things they drew attention to is the need. This is another obligation which flows from all of those rulings that I was talking to you about under international law. There is an obligation, there's an obligation for all governments to review all of their activities in the light of these court rulings and findings and warrants to ensure that they are not providing financial or any other support for genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. It's for the whole package. And so one of the recommendations that's been made is that Canada should appoint an independent expert to investigate and ensure that any organization in Canada with charitable status that has provided, is not providing to see whether or not any organization in Canada with charitable status is providing support for genocide or crimes against humanity in Palestine. And the background to that is that a huge civil society campaign, which has been going on for years, was finally successful in getting one Canadian charity that has long time support for the illegal occupation, was finally stripped of its charitable status. Yes, the JNF. So in other words, this would not be an idle exercise. There's every indication that there are a number of charities that have been doing this.
Hello? Here's a question for Senator Wu. From your perspective, are Carney and Annan throwing smoke in their activity? They really don't plan to do much, but they will do insignificant things to make us feel better? Or is there are things moving? Is it fake or is it real?
So you clarified that I don't represent the government. I'm an independent senator. Well, I'm going to give you a slightly political answer because I am a sitting senator, and it's important that whether I'm a senator or not, that we nudge our leaders in the direction we want them to go in, such that we don't give them a reason to not continue a path that they may be going down, however tentatively. And I think it's fair to say that they have made some tentative steps in the direction of greater awareness of the tragedy, more overt criticism of Israel, and some expression of concern about the situation in Palestine, but very, very tepid. I don't know either of them personally. I've worked with them, of course, and I see them professionally. They're smart people. They are worldly individuals, and it is not possible that they are oblivious to what is going on. It is not possible. But they are, well, that's the chair's prerogative. I'll finish, but what I would say is that they are juggling many, many issues. I flagged just one of them, which is the ongoing existential challenge from our neighbor to the south. They know that Mr. Carney and Minister Annan and others know that if we are too forthright in our support for Israel, our support for Palestine and our criticism of Israel, we will draw the ire of Mr. Trump. That in itself should not be a reason for us to not take that position, but it's all about finessing. You know, I know I've worked with bureaucrats for many years and politicians for many years. It's always about finessing. It's never about the most direct path. It's how do I get there in a way that gives me some political protection, but also genuinely defends Canadians' interests in the broadest sense possible. I don't envy the position, but I think it's becoming quite untenable now, mostly because of what Peggy has said, which is that it's only a matter of time before there is a universal, I think, conclusion of genocide, in which case we will have to reckon with our lack of action and therefore complicity. My fear is that, and I've said that in the speech, is that we will try to go in the opposite direction, maybe hoping that there will be a kind of resolution of the Palestinian problem, essentially through the expulsion of Palestinians and the rebuilding. You know, it will be hyped up as a rebuilding and a regeneration of a new Palestine, but it will be the end of the Palestinian state. That can be spun very quickly by politicians into a positive agenda that Canada has to get on board with, that we are going to put money towards, and that let's put aside let's put aside the questions of the past. Let's put aside the question of genocide and complicity. That would be cynical, but not entirely unlikely.
One thing is that because of the intensity of what's happening in Gaza, the specter has been raised about eliminating the Palestinians. But actually, there are something like 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. There's another 2 million Palestinians living inside Israel, 3 million Palestinians living in the West Bank, and 5 million Palestinians living in neighboring. The 11 or 12 million Palestinians, not including the ones who live here in the United States and so on. So the idea of getting rid of the Palestinians is a long ways from done. And we shouldn't be thinking of the explosion from Gaza as being the end of the story, even if it were to happen, which I, of course, hope it doesn't. Yes, on that issue, I have a question for you. The media talks about 50,000 or 55,000 or something killed. More than a year ago, the Lancet came out estimating 180,000. We can see probably a lot more than 50,000 have been killed. What's your sense of it? What are your? I'm not expecting you to be a statistician, but how extensive do you think the death and destruction has been?
Well, the official number is about now more than 55,000, and I think it's much more than that because we still have people who are dead below the rubbles and destroyed homes. There are many areas in the Gaza Strip right now that are restricted, and no one can go there, and still many dead people in those areas, even in the streets. So as we know, every person that is pronounced dead and by the local authorities, there is the name, the family name, the ID number, and this is all documented. The destruction is immense. The destruction right now is, as I mentioned in the speech, my friend, even a friend of mine a few days ago said that he went to the central area of the Gaza Strip to find a spot for a tent because they have been, I mean, every day, every 2 days or every day there is an evacuation order by the Israelis, dropping the people and say, leave this area, go move to another area. And as I mentioned, like my friend has moved and displaced 15 times, so you can imagine what is it like for people to keep displaced from one area to one area. And my friend said when he was walking, he couldn't even recognize the place where he was walking. And the place is like those landmarks that people knew are no longer existing. No more landmarks, no more places that people recognize like before. It is very, I mean, it's this in the community there, every street, every building, every place has a name, has a memory, but all of this has been completely destroyed, eradicated, exterminated. No more trees in the areas, no more buildings standing up. And as we know, in the Gaza Strip right now, more than 75% of all buildings have been leveled down and destroyed. So, but I believe that the number of people and that have been killed, we are talking about probably more than 160,000, if not 200,000 people. The numbers are so high, so big, that those figures that we see in the media are those that the local authorities have been able to recognize the names, the ID number, and along with the family name as well. I can't imagine what is it like. I mean, to me, to see the Gaza City, my city, the place where I worked, and I worked in development for 12 years. I know the streets. I know the local municipalities. I know the hospitals. We worked to help them. I worked with JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, along with, and we collaborated with many development agencies in the Gaza Strip. And paving a road or building a sidewalk, it takes so much effort. to building a university is not like building a university in Ottawa or in Vancouver. The amount of effort and time to build a university and to build one building, it takes so much effort and so much time. And like the saying goes in Gaza, working and building in Gaza is like scratching a rock. And when I see those images in the city of the hospitals, of the places that we work to support and we work to develop and we work to enhance the public service, it's heartbreaking.
Okay. Thank you. It is heartbreaking. Here's a question for Peggy. Peggy, the Maple, the publication, digital publication, has identified 163 Canadians who've been involved in the Israeli military, many of them during the current genocide. The RCMP has reportedly begun investigations of some kind, but it's been very little clear on what exactly they're doing. Is there any chance for potential criminal responsibility of Canadians, like there is that Hind Rajab organization based in Belgium? Do you follow this at all, Peggy?
The short answer is yes, there is a possibility, because we've only learned recently that, as Canada did with Ukraine, they opened an investigation in order to help the ICC, but also to ensure that if there was any complicity in Canada, that would be addressed. We've learned that the Ukraine investigation was launched with great fanfare. We also provided investigators to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and we provided increased funding to the International Criminal Court. We did, apparently, it was early in 2024 that Canada initiated the RCMP, that the RCMP initiated investigations under our war crimes legislation, but it was made public very recently. So that's very good news. It's the first time that we have initiated any such investigation involving Palestine. But as the Maple pointed out, we don't know anything else about it. It's quite untransparent, whereas the one with respect to Ukraine is very, very transparent. But it's a start, and it means it's something that we have really, really, got to focus on to make sure. And it's all the more important right now because of the draconian sanctions that the United States has brought against the International Criminal Court, which is really hampering its ability to work. By the way, those sanctions against the International Criminal Court are an international crime. But, so it's good that the Maple has brought attention to it, and it was one of the things that the Open for, and it is something that's underway. I just wanted to say something else, though, that in terms, Canada has done more than talk. Yes, I mean, I agree exactly with the point that the senator was making about how we have to nudge them in the right direction. Nudging them in the right direction means that you have to acknowledge what they've done. And in the letter of May 19, it was much, much stronger language. We strongly oppose the expansion of Israel's military operations in Gaza. The level of humanitarian suffering is intolerable. The Israeli government's denial of essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population is unacceptable and risks breaching international humanitarian law. We support its right to defend against terrorism, but this escalation is wholly disproportionate. We've waited a very long time to hear those. Self-defense does not cover, disproportionate use of force in a way that constitutes war crimes. And it promised concrete action, and it did lead to concrete action. It led to sanctions against cabinet ministers, 2 sitting cabinet ministers. Now, as the NDP, Heather McPherson said, the whole cabinet should be sanctioned, not just the 2 ministers. But the thin edge of the wedge is there. They've sanctioned 2 of them for West Bank activity, which is terrible, but not nearly as bad as what the whole cabinet is doing in Gaza. So push, that's the way to push.
Can I jump in here? Peggy's pointed out that the government has used 2 very important words in its statement, disproportionate and intolerable, which to me means we believe that Israel has exhausted its right of self-defense, because that is the essential criteria for the self-defense argument. And I put the question specifically to the government representative in the Senate, that based on the Canadian government's own understanding that Israel's actions were disproportionate and intolerable, whether this government felt that Israel has now exhausted its right of self-defense. And the answer from the government representative, and he may have been freelancing, but he said that is not the government's position. So the government is tying itself in knots with its illogical and inconsistent positions, and sooner or later it's going to have to either cut the knot or try to untangle it.
Do you want to comment too? All right.
Yeah, about this issue, the question is, why did it take the Canadian government this long to come up with this statement? This is, this is, I mean, after 20 months of just genocide, didn't the world know about the genocide was happening already before? And the government was, looks from the Palestinian point of view, this is a very, very late statement. Just like the world has now awakened to this, like Gaza is about to vanish, about to be exterminated, and then the France and Britain and Canada wanted to jump off the ship and say, no, this is not, we were not part of this, we are not complicit, and say we came up with this statement, and then condemning the 2 thugs, you know, those 2 thugs of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, they're loose there in their genocidal language and genocidal actions. I mean, why this long? Why did it take those government this many months into the genocide, almost 2 years now, and just speaking about giving a statement like this and only condemning 2 thugs in the Israeli cabinet, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich? I mean, this is a genocidal government. This is a government that is committing a live stream genocide, and I think much more needs to be done, not just condemning, and this is what the people in Gaza are saying. Is the world watching? Is the world seeing what is happening? They want action. They want this genocide to stop now, today, before tomorrow.
I'm pretty sure that everybody in this room believes that it was too little, too late. The question is, how do we make it more sooner? Senator Wu, I got a question for you. In the UK, an independent MP and former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has introduced a bill calling for an official commission of inquiry on the UK's complicity in the genocide in Gaza. Is it possible to push for a similar commission to investigate Canada's complicity and that of individual politicians? If is it possible, how could it be done?
Well, it's possible to introduce the motion to call for an inquiry or for some other action that would put the government on the, put the government's feet to fire. But whether the motion passes depends on the support of either the MPs in the House or senators. And I've already indicated to all of you that the number of MPs and senators relative to the total number of parliamentarians who have spoken out on this issue or who are willing to be public on this issue is very small. We're talking about, in the case of the Senate, I mean, I only got 3 other colleagues to sign a letter. 3 out of 105. I think there are probably at least a dozen more who are sympathetic, but when I asked some of them to sign the letter, they said they wouldn't because they didn't want to raise the ire of their friends and those who would criticize them. They didn't want to be criticized to be accused of being anti-Semitic. I think that's basically what it boils down to. And in some ways, it's even worse in the House. So there's no way we would get support for it. But I can tell you that I am contemplating a motion in the Senate that would call on the government to explore the risk of being found complicit in war crimes and genocide, and to use this as a way for senators to think more deeply about the issue and to ask themselves if Parliament itself is in some way complicit because we have neglected this issue for so long.
Senator, I'd like to ask you a follow-up on that because as a senator, you're not subject to election. You're not in the position of an MP. And
Don't hold that against me.
Beg your pardon? I missed that.
I said, don't hold it against me.
Right. No, but my point is that when you look around the Senate room, those people are not moderating their positions on considerations of whether they're going to be elected again. So the fact that only 3 or 4 senators supported you, do you think that really reflects what they think? Or is that what they feel that they have some party or other allegiance? How do you parse that?
No, I think many senators understand that something horrible is going on and that that Canada's not doing enough. But I think there is genuine fear that if they speak out, they will be tagged as anti-Semitic and called even worse things. I really worry about the way in which our leadership class in this country has bought into a narrative that allows them to reflexively make statements that undermine Palestinian rights and Palestinian justice. I think about how Justin Trudeau, in the dying days of his prime ministership, declared himself proudly as a Zionist. It's like I don't think he really. To be charitable to him and to most of my colleagues, I don't think most of our leadership class understands the history and the situation in Palestine, and they have not taken the time to educate themselves, and they are enthralled to a narrative that has been dominant for a very long time and which continues to be drummed into them. That's why, as I said in my speech, whenever you ask a politician to comment on this issue, even a fair-minded one, they will give you the reflexive buzzwords, the two-state solution, both sides have to cease and desist. We have to combat the terrorism of Hamas and so on. And it's these pat phrases and these comfort words that allow them and us to just let the situation evolve and pretend that they will sort themselves out. Well, and that's why I put so much emphasis in my talk. I mean, I encourage you to read the full speech, but I think one of the biggest things we need to focus on is to counter to emphasize that it is not anti-Semitic, to identify a genocide that's being perpetrated by a Jewish state. It is not anti-Semitic to call for the resumption of humanitarian aid. I mean, it should be commonsensical, but there are people, my colleagues, who are genuinely afraid of saying some of these things because the taboo of being called anti-Semitic is one of the worst things you can imagine. And Enzo Traveso has identified that problem very well. Anti-Semitism and the remembrance of the Holocaust has become a civil religion for us and weaponized, and woe befall anyone who dares to break that icon.
That's right, absolutely. But they are not the dominant voices in the mainstream.
Hold on for a second. I'm sorry, I can't let it break down into conversation. I apologize.
But if I just wanted to comment, yes, we have very, very active organizations like Independent Jewish Voices and a number of others speaking out against this, but they too are attacked as self-loathing Jews, and there's a whole various formulation for attacking them. But, and I want to come back to this point because I think it's absolutely critical, the political elements. I mean, the Maple has been mentioned. They have been able to dig into and show how much money, really serious money, is being channeled into shaping the media narrative. And the media, if they don't follow a very particular course, like saying the ceasefire collapsed instead of saying Israel broke the ceasefire, then they are subject to complaints, to letters. I mean, they could spend all of their time trying to defend what they have written. Again, with the media, we've seen, with all of the pressure from the public and so on, we've seen them, some of them speak out more. But if we just look at the election, if you want to look at the election results, the Conservatives won a number of previously long-time liberal ridings with significant Jewish populations. So there is a political cost. It's not in any way a justification for the government not acting, but that's that's part of, which is why this whole public debate and countering the official narrative is so important.
Thank you. Well,
We've got written questions.
Excuse me, I've said that questions have to come up on the question cards. Okay, well then I was wrong. I won't do it anymore. I'm sorry. Okay. But there's a question card coming over to you. Thank you. I'm going to have to try to be consistent here. I was going to ask you a question instead. So, all right. Okay. So I want to ask you, one question has been put forward to you, Iyas, on what are the best ways to help Palestinians urgently. Someone says that they already give money to Islamic Relief, they give money to UNRWA. What do you suggest people do for people who are actually suffering in Gaza now?
Completely boycott Israel. Really, disarm Israel and boycott it. Completely. Israel is a threat not only to the Palestinians but to all of us, to all of you and all of humanity. And as we see, Israel right now is waging a war in the area, in the Middle East, that could get out of hand, expand, and become a third world war with nuclear weapons threatening all of us. And this is what they've done. They initiated that attack on Iran on last Friday. And I think Israel right now is a country that is becoming a threat to world peace, and especially in the region. And I think that official narrative that we are just talking about in the Senate or in the MPs, I think that official narrative lives in a different planet. The mainstream media is not the media. Canadian media is owned, the mainstream media, legacy media in Canada is owned by 4 families. 80% of the media is owned by 4 families in Canada. That doesn't represent us. And if they are afraid of being anti-Semitic, well, many Jews are anti-Zionist, and they don't call themselves anti-Semitic. Zionism is different from Judaism, and the Palestinians are the first one to distinguish between being Jewish and being Zionist.
Thank you.
We have all been talking about this, and we've talked about this for many decades. Jews and Muslims and Christians in Palestine lived side by side and coexisted peacefully for more than 1,400 years. The synagogue, the mosque, and the church lived next to each other in the same neighborhood in Jerusalem, in Ramallah, in Gaza, in Haifa, in Jaffa, in Nablus. They coexisted and lived piece by piece as Palestinian Jews, as Muslim Jews, as Christian Palestinians Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Muslims and Palestinian Christians, we have lived peacefully together until this Zionist state, this murderous fascist state comes in, and look what they're doing. Look what they're doing. They are implementing a genocide. And you don't tell me because somebody, if the Holocaust has been done, which is horrible, which is bad, let Germany pay for the Holocaust, not us. Germany must pay for the Holocaust, not us. It is the German, and after all, after the United States, of all of this perverted mentality of Germany supporting Israel, the second supporting it after America, and look what they've done. They should pay for what they have done to the Jewish people of Europe and to Germany, not us. We didn't do the Holocaust. We didn't commit it.
Thank you.
So this must stop, and everybody has the responsibility to act, to speak to those sleeping establishment here in Ottawa and everywhere else.
Peggy, under what conditions should Canada either recall its ambassador to Israel or expel the Israeli ambassador to Canada? What would be the consequences of that, and under what conditions should we do it? Peggy.
Oh, gee, I'm focusing much more on the suspension of the free trade agreement. I mean, the conditions, I think you don't want to cut diplomatic relations. But you want to show displeasure. So, recalling our ambassador or publicly reprimanding, but so that the channels are kept open, I think would be appropriate. The other aspect of this problem is that it's so difficult, and you've seen efforts, and this is what Carney's doing with these statements with others, Trudeau had started it, is that it's not just Canada and the US. Most of the Western countries, it started with the US, and they've all, little by little, bought into this narrative. And therefore, it's very hard. The political class, it's a club as well. It's very, very, very hard to step out from that. Now, there are, as I've mentioned, countries that are too important, really important, Ireland and Norway, that have just led the charge on this. And Norway, for example, has given notice to all of its companies that they must review their business with Israel with a view to avoiding being complicit in serious violations of international law. And the other thing I want to say about, I'm hammering home on the free trade, I want you all writing to the government demanding that they suspend this illegal agreement. It's illegal under international law, our free trade agreement, because of the way it's worded. It doesn't require legislation. Exactly. It can be done by regulation. So send your letters, phone, email, postcards, yes.
Yes, okay. We're moving into that category. You have on your desk, on your chairs, postcards.
That's hit them where it hurts. Is what I'm
it has this. Well, I don't need to read it out loud, but it says this, or it says stop arming Israel. Right? That's what it says on that one. So, and they do talk about the free trade agreement. So those postcards you just have to sign. We will collect them for you, and we'll put them in the mail. They go free. And thousands of people, and if you grab one for your mother or for your uncle or your friend, so we can send them in. If you haven't, you didn't get a chance to take a crack at that basket, we could still make a contribution on the way out. And if you didn't have cash with you, you can make a e-transfer to ofip.finance@gmail.com. We're coming now to the end of our session. First of all, I'd like to ask you to, I'm going to make a few closing remarks, but I want to first of all thank the three speakers for their presentations. I just want to sum up a little bit what we learned and from the discussions, what we can realistically demand that Canada do, and what we can do individually to make that happen. First of all, what did we learn from the speakers? Well, we already knew the situation in Gaza was horrible, and we know the Palestinians have an amazing tenacity in the face of oppression, that they're not giving up, and we won't do so either. We also learned of Canada's international obligations under international law that Peggy reminded us of, whether it's Security Council, International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court. She reminded us that almost exactly a year ago, the International Court of Justice found that all of Israel's settlements are illegal and in violation of international law, and that member countries, including Canada, are supposed to do something about it. Palestinians, settlers have to leave, and the Palestinians have to be compensated. So far, Canada is falling very short on that. From the Senator's remarks, we also reminded that the government faces intense pressures from various directions. We know that some organizations, churches, unions, civil society organizations, Muslim organizations, Palestinian organizations have been lobbying the government, but it's still far from enough. We need to increase that pressure. One way for us is to shout louder, but an even better way is for us to become more numerous. What should we ask Canada to do? We know that talk will not change Israel's behavior. We need our government to take specific steps which will increase the pressure on Israel. On your seat, you have a document. You have this document here that lists a number of suggestions that Canada could take immediately. They include recommendations from Amnesty International. They're not our recommendations. We picked them up from other organizations. Among them, we suggest immediately stopping all military sales either way to Israel, even ones that go through the United States, and Senator Wu talked about that. That's a challenge because the Americans are going to say, you're not allowed to do that.
But we have stopped. We have stopped most of them through
Right.
the U.S. That's the point. We actually have done that. It's just parts we haven't done, but we have stopped significant exports to Israel via the U.S.
Okay. We should
progress.
suspend all trade with Israel as long as it remains to be in violation of international law. Everyone in this room knows that Canada has signed this free trade agreement with Israel called SIFTA. Not very many Canadians know that. This is a political agreement, not an economic agreement. In fact, our trade with Israel is tiny. It's 1/1000th of our trade with the United States. So shutting down the free trade agreement will not have huge economic consequences for us, but it would be a huge political statement for Israel. We should recognize immediately and unconditionally the state of Palestine. All political parties say they want to recognize the state of Palestine, but they say that they'll do it when Israel agrees.
Yeah, no.
Well,
We don't say that.
well, they say on the right
government
conditions, which amounts to the same thing.
No.
Just 1 year ago, the Israeli Knesset voted almost unanimously that it would never recognize a Palestinian state. So Canada should not wait till Israel agrees. Canada should immediately recognize it now.
We don't have that.
We should also begin to call for accountability. Israel remains responsible for the deaths of over 55,000 people, maybe 100,000 people, maybe, and even if the troops withdraw, even if the food comes into Gaza, Israel is still responsible for those crimes. Those crimes demand investigation and accountability, just like happened after World War II with the Nuremberg trials.
Yes.
What can we do as individuals? There's also some suggestions in that document. If those things are things that we can reasonably ask Canada to do, what can we do to make sure that it's more likely? On your seat, you're given the postcard. Mail the postcard in to Mr. Carney. Give a postcard to your friend. On the flip side of the document, you'll see a list of some other things that we can do as individuals. But I want to draw your attention to the one that I think is the most difficult. It has to do with issues that Iyas has raised, that Peggy has raised, and that Senator Wu has raised. Let's face it, it's hard to talk to other people about the Israel-Palestine question. It's easy to talk to other Arabs or other Palestinians, but other people who don't fall in that category or aren't radicals for whatever political reason. It's hard to raise the topic. It's hard to have the conversation. Why is that? It's because, and Senator Wu put his finger on it, the Zionist story about the need for a Jewish state to protect Jews has been circulating in Canada for at least 75 years. In fact, the Zionist Federation of Canada was created in 1921, the same year that Britain took over the mandate. Every school child in Canada has read the story of Anne Frank. Who hasn't seen Schindler's List, or The Pianist, or other movies about the Holocaust? Every Canadian 65 years or older was deeply impacted by a movie called Exodus, about European Jews narrowly escaping death camps to come to Palestine, only to be met by hostile Arabs. These are moving stories. We should learn about the murder of 6 million Jews in Europe by the Nazi regime. But how many Canadians have ever read a book about the Nakba? Most Canadians can't even spell Nakba, let alone hearing about it. Every Canadian has a Jewish friend, or a Jewish neighbor, or a Jewish colleague who can share the Zionist narrative about exile, oppression, and the wonders of creating a new state. As a result, most Canadians know, and as the Senator said, it's the default position of most Canadians, that know and accept some version of the Zionist narrative, namely that Jews are permanently in danger, especially from Arabs and Muslims. Even though few Canadians would call themselves Zionists, like our previous Prime Minister did, they have absorbed the Zionist point of view. So trying to raise a different story is very difficult. But if you don't raise it, it won't get raised. And we have to find ways to do that, to broaden the circle of people who understand the history. I want to end with this. I'm often asked, why is Palestine so important to you? Why am I more interested in Palestine than Sudan or Kashmir or Tibet or Xinjiang or Rohingya? Sometimes the question is posed to me out of pure curiosity, but sometimes I feel it reflects a suspicion about whether or not I have a hidden anti-Semitic agenda. I think there are three very good reasons why Canadians should pay particular interest to Palestine at this point in time. It's not because the Palestinians are better or more important than the Sudanese or the Rohingya or the Tibetans. The first reason is that where Canada had no involvement in the creation of the Sudan conflict, no involvement in the Kashmir conflict or the Rohingya conflict, we were deeply involved in the creation of Israel. In 1947, our representative at the UN, the Senator raised it, Lester Pearson, actively lobbied for UN Resolution 181. That resolution was supported by all the European members of the UN. It was called the Partition Resolution, but in fact, it laid out the legal foundation for the confiscation of half of Palestine for the benefit of European Jewish refugees. That resolution is now part of international law, but it was unfair and racist, and it should be reconsidered. It was based on the idea that the needs of white Europeans was more important than those of a few Arabs. Because Canada lobbied hard to support it, Canada bears a significant responsibility for the Nakba and for the expulsion of Palestinians, which is the origin of today's problem in Gaza and the West Bank. Our motives as Canadians were partly good and partly bad. The good part is that Canada was overcome with remorse after the Holocaust and the little we'd done to protect Jews. And we wanted to somehow compensate and protect the European refugees, Jewish refugees who had survived. But at the same time, we didn't want those refugees to come here. Canada was very anti-Semitic at the time. None is too many was the watchword of our immigration policy. We may have felt sorry for the Jews, but we preferred to send them to Palestine. The second reason to focus on Palestine is that Canada does not support and defend the ongoing repression and denial of human rights in Myanmar or the Sudan. But we do sell arms and provide diplomatic cover to Israel at the UN in this and every other way. And we have this ongoing issue about the free trade agreement with Israel. We're helping Israel economically and politically. And thirdly, Palestine should be important to every Canadian because Western governments, including Canada, are actively feeding and encouraging a real-time genocide. I quote here from retired Canadian General Romeo Dallaire, also retired Senator Romeo Dallaire, and I'm quoting him. "What is happening in Gaza is a genocide," said Senator Robero, meeting all the criteria of a genocide. "There is no doubt in my military mind that what is going on, that is what is going on," said General Romeo Dallaire. He continued, "Those 13-year-olds will become adults in a few years. They have no school, no money, no jobs, no future. The infrastructure is all destroyed, and half of their family has been killed, and they've been living the trauma of war. What do you think they are going to do?" If we really care about Western values of liberty, justice, and human rights, Palestine is the issue today. If we care about due process, about free speech, about respect for international law, Palestine is the issue today. If we care about the use of starvation as collective punishment, Palestine is the issue. Palestine matters because we have stated over and over and over matter. And if Canada really believes this, we have to put our beliefs into action. Thank you. So thank you. We now adjourn the meeting. As I said, our speakers said they would hang around to respond to questions individually if you want to talk for a bit. I'm asked to remind you that outside the church there's some people who have end the genocide signs, lawn signs or window signs if you want them. Anything else I was supposed to say? That's it. Don't forget the postcards. Don't forget, you can make a donation on the way out if you didn't get a chance to on the way it came by. And pick up this pamphlet as well with what to do, what Canada can do, and what we can do. Thank you very much.